Hey, 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 Fit Mama. Jen Oliver here, your host of the Fit Mama podcast. This is the work in to your workout. Hey, Fit Mama. I am so excited today to have the one and only Vagina Coach, Kim Vopni, today with us here for this episode of the Fit Mama podcast. Kim Vopni from vaginacoach.com helps women optimize their pelvic health in pregnancy, motherhood, and menopause. She is on a mission to break through taboos and redefine how we think about women's health. Kim says light bladder leakage is not just part of being a woman. She wants women to know how to connect to their pelvic floor so they can overcome challenges like incontinence and organ prolapse and regain a sense of control and power in their lives. She has combined so much of what she's learned from her own pregnancies and births and now perimenopause, and coupled it with all that she's learned in the last decade of helping women prepare for their births and restore their pelvic floor health after having a baby. She is amazing. You will find so much valuable information in this episode, and you can find her at all the links in the show notes. I can't wait for us to just dive right into what she does as a vagina coach. Here she is, Kim Vopni. Here we are live with Kim Vopni, the Vagina Coach. Hey, Kim.
Hey, Jen. How are you?
I'm great. It's so awesome to have you on the podcast. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Yes. So first of all, I am going to highlight straight up front the fact that you call yourself the Vagina Coach, which I personally love. Tell us about this name and how you got there.
It was sort of one of those things like accidentally on purpose and kind of like how my business started too. And so I've been a pelvic health, promoter,
yes,
wellness advocate for many, many years. And for several years, I was known as the fitness doula because I worked primarily with pregnant women. I was a personal trainer. I had also trained as a doula, and I was combining those two to help women prepare to push, prepare for their pregnancies and postpartum recovery and what have you. And so as I evolved myself, and as more people were coming to me, there was more and more people afterwards, after they've had babies, or even women who've never had children before, coming and saying, I have this problem now, what do I do? And so fitness doula wasn't necessarily resonating with a broader audience.
Right.
And I was asked to speak at a conference a few years ago. I belong to, it's a business organization called Mompreneur, and
Okay.
I was asked to speak at the national conference, and
Nice.
my presentation was called Kegels and Keyboards, How Optimizing Your Pelvic Floor Health Can Make You a Better Entrepreneur.
Ooh.
And so there were several speakers throughout the weekend. And when it was my turn, I got up, and, many of the people before me were marketing coaches or, business strategist or some type of coach for your business. And so I got up and I said, all right, well, now you have a vagina coach for your business. And it kind of just came out, and everybody laughed and it was funny. And then afterwards I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I do. That sums it up. And so that's kind of where the name came from. It was, just a bit of an off the cuff comment. And then it resonated with me and everybody else. So that's how it happened.
Love it. Well, I love it. I've been following you since before the Vagina Coach days. And when that popped up, I was like, yes, nailed it. Like, it was so perfect. So I love it, love it, love it. And, you've done so much through your work with Bellies Inc., through your work that you have been doing with the fitness doula stuff so long. I mean, you were doing it way before, anybody was really talking about it. So it's really exciting to see sort of how far you've come, how mainstream now talking about vagina and pelvic floor is, which for my business, I have a lot of thanks to give to you and your compatriots at Bellies Inc., because you guys are just so amazing and trailblazers. So I thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, you guys are awesome. So let's get into a little bit about what you do with your clients now. So, are you focused mostly on pregnancy, or is it a lot of postpartum? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I got into the work that I do through my own pregnancies, and really it became important to me to increase awareness about pelvic health when there was the biggest opportunity to prevent. And
Yeah.
that was pregnant women or even before you're pregnant. So that's kind of how it started. And it definitely still remains a passion of mine. However, I do find that most people come to me after the fact. So
Right.
the larger population that I work with is definitely on the postpartum side. And again, not necessarily people who've had children. It can be anybody, but most of the time it is somebody who has had children. And I would say that it's becoming a bit more common to have, for me in my client group, that it's women who are at least 5 years post.
Yeah.
So, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, kind of in there.
Yeah.
So I'd say, that usually they have a couple of kids and they're sort of in their, early to mid 30s ish, sometimes late 30s. That's kind of the most, well, actually into 30s to 40s, I would say. So it's the most common. So definitely more on the postpartum side for sure.
Awesome. And I know you're a huge advocate of pelvic health physio. And, I started talking about that thanks to you and your Belly Zinc compatriots, as I said. But the one thing that you talk about a lot that I want to get into is specifically around kegels. And you mentioned you had done that talk. Tell us a little bit about this, because kegels seems to be one of the greatest misconceptions about the pelvic floor and getting ready for pregnancy or postpartum and birthing and what you should do after. And there's so much out there. So can you just talk to us about kegels for a little?
Yeah, for sure. So pelvic health physiotherapists are somebody who I think every single woman should see annually, even if you have no symptoms of, incontinence or prolapse or anything like that. And they can help you assess or they can assess for you and then help you learn how to do a Kegel. But you can also, if you don't have access to one, you can use your own tools. You can use your fingers. You can use a partner's fingers or a partner's penis, or if you have biofeedback, there's lots of different biofeedback Kegel exercisers now. The ELVIE is one that is really, really popular and probably my favorite in terms of the ones that are out there now. But
yes.
So Kegels are essentially the contraction, and so kind of the engagement and the lifting and then the letting go of the muscles in the pelvic floor. And they were designed by Dr. Kegel, who saw women having challenges after they had given birth, recovering that function and dealing with incontinence. So he used a biofeedback device called a perineometer, and that allowed women to see even if they couldn't necessarily feel. And what's happened over time is, as many things in fitness, people think harder is better, and the emphasis is definitely placed on squeeze the hell out of your vagina, and people have forgotten that there's a lift and a letting go, and more importantly, the letting go piece. And so there's been lots of talk also within the world of pelvic health that not everybody should be doing Kegels, and I agree with that to an extent. So I think everybody should do pelvic floor exercise with movement. And there are some people who need to focus more on the letting go piece, and there are other people who need to focus more on the lifting piece, so to speak. So it's kind of like some people, everybody should be doing movement and exercise. And there's some people who maybe need a little bit more yoga in their life. And there's other people who maybe need a bit more, HIIT training and weightlifting in their life kind of thing. So I think that everybody should have an element of pelvic floor fitness in it, even if you have if you've been told not to do Kegels because you have a hypertonic, meaning you hold more tension in your pelvic floor. I still believe that there should be a place in there for the balance of the contract and the lift and then the letting go. You just maybe need to spend more time on the release work and the letting go piece. And specifically with pregnant women, most people first learn about Kegels when they're pregnant. People say, you make sure you do your Kegels. And really there's not a lot of care. There's not a lot of teaching involved. People just say, do Kegels. And it's kind of this elusive exercise that people think they should be or feel they should be doing, but don't know how to do them. And in birth, again, when it comes time to birthing a babe, we want a pelvic floor that is supple and that has give and that can kind of let that tension drain and can yield to sensations of pressure and stretch and what have you. And if we are focused more on the up and the squeeze and the lift part of the Kegel throughout our pregnancy, there's not as much opportunity for the pelvic floor to have learned that the ability to find ease and the letting go and the releasing. So specifically in pregnancy, yes, we want to make sure that the pelvic floor can contract and lift. It's carrying a progressive load throughout pregnancy. We want to make sure it's strong and able to do that. But really, we need to put a huge emphasis on that learning to let go and releasing. And, I always say blossom your vulva and find space between your sit bones. And that will help foster a pelvic floor that responds more appropriately in birth. And then one comment I'll say is on the postpartum recovery side, getting back to kegels or pelvic floor exercise, it's always the first recovery exercise that I give. It helps stimulate nerve growth factor. It helps increase circulation. It's a healing exercise, and not everybody's comfortable adding the full contract and lift right away, especially if you have had some tearing and some stitches and what have you. If you've done it beforehand and you understand the visualization of what's happening, the dynamics of what's happening in your pelvic floor, simply breathing and visualizing that happening is beneficial. And then you can add the Kegel portion when you feel ready.
Awesome. Great descriptions. That's really, really valuable. And I like what you're saying about having that visual, because you're right. So often women can't feel it. Now, is that normal?
I would say it's common. It really, there's not a lot of, again, attention paid to the pelvic floor, and it can be a source of shame and embarrassment. There could be some trauma associated with the pelvic floor. So there's lots of reasons why, and also birth itself, if there has been some physical trauma such as tearing or an episiotomy, there can be some dissociation. There's things that can influence our ability to connect, or our desire to connect with our pelvic floor muscles.
Yes.
So it's common that happens, and there's many reasons that can contribute to that happening, but it's not to say that can never be retrained.
Right. I love that. Good point. Good point. Now, how did you get into this? I mean, you talked a little bit about education before. Had you struggled with pelvic floor issues after I know you have 2 boys, right?
I have 2 boys, yeah. I got into it because I was afraid of tearing. And I remember seeing in grade 6, I saw a birth video, and I just thought, holy Hannah, I'm not doing that. And it kind of scared me. And then, as I aged, I kept thinking, well, my mom did it and my aunts have done it. And, and I was asking my mom questions about it. And she said, she was very open and honest with me. And she talked about her birth, and she had an episiotomy. And then she said, they cut. And I'm like, oh my God, they cut. And I just thought, I'm just not doing this. And so then as I still am growing up more, and I decided that I do want to start a family. And I had watched my sister-in-law give birth. She used midwives. And so I had an introduction to different from what you see in the mainstream, and different from my mom's story. And so when I was pregnant myself the following year, I was inspired to learn as much as I could about how to prevent tearing. I actually went down the path of saying, well, maybe I should just have a cesarean birth instead, and opt for that. And working with my midwives, they told me about perineal massage, or I had learned about it from my sister-in-law, but then they told me about a product called the Epino, which is a biofeedback device for pelvic floor training, and it helps learn to yield and what have you. So I used that product, and I had a great experience. There was many other factors that contributed to my birth experience for sure, but I definitely credit that product as well. And I contacted the company and said, hey, I want to tell more women about this. Can I be a distributor? Awesome. And my intention was not to start a business. It was just, I wanted more women to know about it. And I just kind of told people on the side and through my midwives. And that was the start, even though, again, it wasn't necessarily supposed to be a business. And then I had a second child. And then in 2009, I was laid off from my corporate job, so to speak. Okay. And I decided to see if I could make a go with this product. So I had worked in fitness before and got out of it. And then I said, okay, well, I'm just going to get back into it, because all the principles I'm talking about are very fitness related. And I recertified in pre-postnatal and started to try to tell more people about this product. And that's how I found out about pelvic floor physiotherapists. And then I created my Prepare to Push. And so there was kind of this evolution that happened out of my own desire to prevent tearing and and prevent the issues that my mom did have. So I thankfully birthed through an intact perineum with both of my births. Yay! Not had incontinence. I do have a rectocele, which is my rectum bulges into my vagina a little bit. But I feel very fortunate that I was in a position to prevent a lot of things that I hear from many of my clients, and that I had the knowledge that made me feel empowered, and I knew what to do in my recovery. And I know a heck of a lot more now than I did then as well, which there's some things that I would do differently. But anyway, that's kind of how it started, and it just kind of kept going.
That is great. And I know you've helped many people with the Epino. And I'm curious now, with the Epino, recently it's been disallowed to be sold in Canada. Is this correct? I feel like I've read something about that, and you had something on that on your site. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so it's super unfortunate, and I'm really sad. But what happened is, in order to sell a medical device in any country, you have to have the product licensed through whatever health regulatory. So in Canada, we have Health Canada.
Okay.
And the Health Canada made a decision a few years ago to transition to a new audit program, so a new way to become licensed to sell a product. And they are the only country in the world who made it mandatory and for this specific audit. And so it's more rigorous and it's much more costly. And what that meant is a lot of smaller manufacturers looked at it and said, well, I have to go through this whole other regulatory process that will only allow me to sell in Canada. It doesn't apply to any of the others. So I have to do my regular licensing requirements for these other countries. And like the ISO type certifications apply to many other countries. So when Canada introduced this new one, a lot of small companies looked at it and said, it's just not worth it for us to have to go through a whole other new audit and all the expenses. So I don't know what the final number, but at the time, there was about 150 companies who chose to pull out of Canada as a result of those new requirements. So it's not that it was not safe, or it was nothing to do with that. It was just simply, it came down to math, and the manufacturer just said, sorry, but we don't sell enough in Canada to warrant these additional costs. So it totally sucks.
Yeah, because that was huge. I mean, I know you talked about it a lot, but you refer to it and then go much further beyond it in your Prepare to Push, the book and the program. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So Prepare to Push really came out of, again, I was laid off, and all of a sudden I was like, okay, I got to tell more people about this product and I'm going to start a business here. And I took my fitness and, again, I'd recertified, and then I had taken a doula training course, and I coupled that, and I said, really, my intention with the Epino, yes, I would like to sell more of these products and get women more aware, but ultimately it's about preparing the body for the physical demands of labor and birth. Mm-hmm. We need to treat it like we do any other physical event we prepare for. When we want to run a marathon, we progressively run larger, longer distances, and then we go and we perform at that event. And birth is really the same thing. We have to do progressive training in preparation for our event. And while we can't give birth over and over, we can certainly prepare for birth positions that we might be using more, learn how the body is going to respond, or how we need it to respond in pregnancy and in labor and birth. And then, as in any other fitness and movement type event that we perform in, there's always an element of recovery, and that was so overlooked in everything. And that was when women may have had a great birth experience and maybe they didn't have a lot of tearing, but then they were like, okay, I'm back, I'm ready to go, and they're running at 2 weeks postpartum, and they're going back to the gym, and that's when a lot of the challenges started, because the body was simply not in a position to respond to those loads. It hadn't healed, it hadn't recovered, the core hadn't been retrained. And so I created a workshop that would cover that, yes, how can we prepare with the principle of specificity for our birth, but then also how do we factor in that recovery piece so that we can get back to whatever we want to do with strength and with confidence. And some women feel they're even stronger after having their babe than they were before, because they've paid more attention to the pelvic floor. So really, Prepare to Push started, yes, with a bit of an intention to sell the Epino or increase awareness about it, but the book, it goes into a lot more detail than, you don't have to have an Epino in order to benefit from what's in the book or in the online program.
So true. And that book is so valuable. And there's just not a lot of books out there that go into the detail that your Prepare to Push book did. And the more recent book that you wrote with the Bellies Inc. women, talk to us about that book, because I'm really excited about that one as well.
Yeah, so that one, so after I started my business and was doing Prepare to Push, the year later, I I started looking at diastasis recti and the link between the pelvic floor and doing more research. And I connected with Samantha,
Yes.
and who I think she's going to be on, or maybe has been on your podcast.
Yeah, she is also a guest. So we will definitely link the two of you up for sure.
Yeah. So we met, and then we started strategizing, and we were using a specific protocol from a woman in the States, and then we had a physiotherapist referring to us, and we finally tracked her down. That's Julia DiPaolo. And then the three of us sat down and said, you know what, this is grossly underserved, this part of the market. We need something better than what's currently available for women. And so that's how that business started. And that then, we definitely focus on the birth and the postpartum recovery. And we kind of are inspired by the philosophy of mother roasting, but that's kind of just an introduction. And then anyway, so years go by, we create this product. We then have an education arm to our business, and we start presenting at CanFit Pro, which is a fitness conference. And we had, unbeknownst to us, we had it was a woman in our session who was the acquisitions editor for Human Kinetics. And she approached us and said, we have a very, very outdated prenatal fitness book. You really need to update our information, and would you be interested in authoring that? And so of course we said yes, and it was a bit of a long process to get it all, in the works, or get it all signed. But once we did, it was amazing. So we created this book called Pregnancy Fitness. It's published through Human Kinetics, and we were so grateful for the fact that mainstream fitness had opened it up. So it wasn't now saying, oh, well, that's not really appropriate for our audience, or you can't say the word vagina, or, we came in and we were the subject matter expert, and they allowed us to tell it, and to teach how it should be taught. I mean, it's part of the body. People who are working with pregnant women, or new moms, or women in general, need to understand the influences of pregnancy and birth and hormones and all of that. And really, it's a huge missing piece out of a lot of other prenatal education that's out there. So we were so, so grateful for the chance to do that, and that they welcomed our information with open arms. And so that was a really cool book. But it really goes through the different trimesters, all the different changes that are happening in the body. We, of course, have a huge emphasis on the pelvic floor and the abdomen. Yeah. We do talk a little bit about some of the elements from Prepare to Push, the recovery piece, and it's very fitness. So we give you workouts and different ways to weight train, and all the different positions you should be aware of. And so it really goes in depth. It's very fitness focused.
I love that. Now, is that one specifically targeted to fitness professionals, or is that one for a pregnant woman to pick up?
We wrote it for the consumer. However, we use it as the manual in our pre-postnatal fitness course.
Awesome.
It is recommended by CanFit Pro to lots of their professionals as well. So I don't know, because most of the time it's purchased through Human Kinetics, but I don't know that, and I don't even know if they can track it. They might, but the breakdown of professional versus consumer, I don't know what that would be, but
it's for both.
I would suspect it actually might be a little bit heavier on the professional side, only because that's our community we definitely have a lot of colleagues who were purchasing it.
Well, there was nothing like that out there, right? I mean, when I first took your training, that was now back in 2014, so 5 years ago, there was, I think in my city, there was one pelvic floor physio that I found, and now I believe there are over 10. And that's just within 5 years. Yeah. I mean, nobody was talking about this stuff. And like you said, if they were even worried about printing vagina or talking about the pelvic floor in the books, there's no surprise that was the case. And I know, some of my darkest days were because I didn't have this knowledge, and I lacked this knowledge. And I thought, if I, as a trainer, am lacking in this knowledge, who is to have it? Who are these women out there giving birth and getting back into, fitness safely? Oh yeah, wait, there aren't any.
Yeah.
Was really what I found. Yeah. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
So I'm so grateful for your courage and the courage of you three to get out there and really spread this message, because it's something that there is just, there really is, even no matter where you turn, there's always a lack of information in this area, because I think, like you said, it garners up images of, TMI, or, well, can't talk about that, or not sure what to say, or I might get it wrong, or it's too private, which I totally get, right? But you see it firsthand, the struggles and the injuries people go through when, they do go back too hard, too soon. What was it for you that really led to sort of the breakthrough for you that, okay, this has to get out there more? Were you seeing it a lot too, that people were getting injured, or what was it?
The breakthrough for initially was definitely as soon as I gave birth, and I had this experience that none of my other friends had. And of course, every experience is different, but everybody came out of it with injury. Really. Yes. So that was definitely the starting point for me. And then afterwards, my intention was to get in front of more pregnant women, but I had women coming to me after the fact saying, well, I had my kids already. Can you still help me? This is what my story is. And many people coming who were just misinformed or ill-informed or not informed at all, really, and went through birth with a trust in their healthcare provider that didn't necessarily lead them appropriately, I guess is what I'll say. And so they had some challenges, and then they felt, as you said, they had some dark days. They relied on Google, and they went down this big rabbit hole of and fear. And, that's one thing. While the awareness has definitely exploded in the last few years, there's also been a lot of hysteria that's created around it as well. And so it's now kind of trying to calm fears a lot in women, and normalizing it and understanding that there is help. And so, yes, I would say most people were coming with, most come to me because they have a challenge that is existing that they would like dealt with, and they don't know who else to go to, or they have returned to fitness and then said, I really shouldn't have done this, or I should have listened to this, or whatever. And there's a lot of shoulding that happens. So it's, I could go on forever, but it's very, very common. And I'm grateful for the internet, for the awareness that it's created. And now it's just a matter of sifting through, because there's a whole ton of people talking about it now. And it's just now hoping that women get to the right, more educated people.
Yes. So true. Because you're right. I mean, it makes sense that people come to you after the fact, because somehow I think when we're in pregnancy, unless we have a specific issue during that time, we kind of are still in that idyllic phase where everything's just going to go seamlessly. And what we aren't aware of, we don't know, right? We don't know which questions to ask. And I'm glad that, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that people are more apt to fix a problem that exists, not as apt to fix
prevention per se.
They're like, well, I don't have a problem, I'm fine.
So true.
Yeah. So once it's there, then they say, okay, well, I need to find a solution for this. And I get that, but so it's definitely harder to preach to the pelvic floor, to the pregnant population, especially the first time. The second time pregnant mom will listen very closely, because they're like, okay, I wish I'd known this before. But the first time, like, no, I'm fine. I'm fit, or so it's just.
And what do you say to that comment? Because I know I've heard that before too, and I was one of those people myself who was like, oh, I got it all together. I don't, you don't know what you don't know, so you don't ask the questions, and nobody's forthcoming. And so how do you kind of, without creating fear or, raising alarm bells for women, how do you go about educating women before it's too late? And not that it's ever too late, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Never too late, but I always say that I come from an area of prevention, and I have worked, because the bigger part of my population, my client population, is on the postpartum side. It shows you that there are challenges that need to be addressed. Yeah, and it's definitely more. It's becoming more of an issue. I don't like to say the word issue, but it's becoming more common. Right. And then I'll say my philosophy really comes from prevention, and that I use the principle of specificity And I help women incorporate that into their training so that they are better prepared for, and that they have the element of recovery, so they're less likely to have these challenges. And then at the end of the day, they can make a choice from there if it's something that resonates with them or not. And I will say there's been a lot of people that come to me after their second, they're like, I really should have listened to you the first time. And fine. At least they are informed. That's my biggest thing. Is at least I've played a role in putting the awareness in front of them, and that they have a choice to do something or not do something. And that's their choice at the end of the day. But as long as they are informed, that was the biggest piece that was missing, was there was just the information wasn't been getting.
Well, and I love what you say about, this principle of specificity that you referred to. And you talked about this earlier when you were making that reference to the birth itself being akin to, let's say, a marathon, right? Which I think is a brilliant parallel. I mean, having it such that we see the birth as this performance, right? Which obviously, we're not there judging the performance, but it's something to lead up to. It's a training for the big event. And whereas that's not really mainstream in pregnancy, right? I mean, people are like, slow down, wait, don't lift anything, don't do anything, How do you go in and educate in terms of that? Do you talk about this kind of example a lot, or how do you go in there and talk about that?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing that I share. And really, I always say birth is like a marathon, but it's not a race. And it's also, when you think about it, it's actually more like 4 or 5 marathons. It's not like a 4-hour. Very rarely do you ever have a 4-hour birth.
Right. Very rarely. Yeah.
It's multiple. It's an incredibly physically.
It's an ultra marathon or.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when people think about it, like, people have heard the term birth is like a marathon. They're like, oh yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
I work out, or I'm whatever. And when you bring in saying there's a fitness principle called the principle of specificity, and you want to train in ways that will prepare you for the event that you are going to do. So if you're going to climb a mountain, you're going to do lots of climbing. If you're going to do a triathlon, you have to swim, bike, and run. And so when they it's kind of like a light bulb, and they go, oh yeah, okay. And then they said, well, I mean, images of birth in the media are very much of lying on your back and screaming.
Yes, and exactly.
Really, it's also an education about what normal physiological birth should be like, and that birth should actually be very active and dynamic, and really it's not something to be taken lying down, so to speak. And so when we have an understanding of the way that birth really, what can help facilitate birth with the movement and different positioning and the kind of the mind-body connection, then women start to get it, and they're like, okay, I never even thought of it that way. So that's how I go in whenever I'm talking to pregnant women. It's pregnant people. It's really about talk. That's exactly what I do. Is you've got to train. You have to have an understanding of what the pelvic floor is, the functions it performs, how it's changing in pregnancy, how you can support it in your pregnancy so that it's more likely to respond appropriately in labor, and then how you can recover form and function postpartum. You have to kind of understand those main steps.
Brilliant. Now, I would love to just touch for a brief moment on some of the injuries or issues that people run into postpartum that they might call you for. So, we know a little bit about diastasis, and I've talked about that here, and you mentioned it earlier, but what are some of these postpartum core injuries, so to speak, that people, that it's never too late to heal, but it's time to know whether you have these?
So the most common one for sure is incontinence, and the most common out of that is stress urinary incontinence, which, people call it sneeze pee or peasing, and, they might laugh or cough or sneeze or jump or lift something and they leak urine.
Right.
So that would definitely be the most common one for sure. And the next one after that would be organ prolapse. So the bladder, the uterus, and the rectum can shift out of their optimal alignment, and the bladder and the rectum can start to bulge into either the anterior wall, so the bladder can start to bulge into the anterior wall, the front wall of the vagina, and the rectum can bulge into the posterior wall. And then the uterus itself can actually descend into the vagina. So those are They can be quite uncomfortable, but also they can also be very asymptomatic early on. And that's another reason why I'm such a huge fan of pelvic floor physio, because early stage prolapse is often asymptomatic. And if you can catch it before it starts to develop into something further, then you're in a position to potentially stop it or even reverse it. And then back pain and diastasis recti would be the other. Those would be kind of the four most common in that order.
Okay.
But incontinence definitely is for sure the first. And anybody who comes to see me, I have questions about pain. And while some of what I do, like the hypopressive method, some of the release stuff that I do can help with pain, I 100,000 million%, I'm referring everybody anyway, but pain people, I'm definitely referring on to pelvic floor physiotherapy if they have access to that. Just because it starts to go a little bit beyond my scope of practice, and there's many reasons that can contribute to the pain. And I want to make sure that what I'm doing with them is not going to exacerbate that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Great points. Really good. I'm glad that you brought up that, and especially looking for that pain. And that you refer everybody 100%. I mean, you said it earlier and we kind of touched along it, but moved on. I think that was so important what you said about going annually, even if you're asymptomatic, which means you're having no symptoms, right? So just going every year as every March I go for a checkup with my pelvic floor physio. Talk to us about the benefits of that, even if you have no symptoms.
Yeah. So I remember when I first started out, so in 2009, when I first started, trying to make this Epino thing a bit more common, or a bit more awareness around it, I had a few pelvic floor physiotherapists calling me and referring people. And I thought, I've never heard of a pelvic floor physiotherapist. And so I went and met with them and I said, tell me about what you do. I've never heard of you before. And then the more they were talking and teaching me, I thought, oh my gosh, like I've learned more about myself and women's bodies in the last hour than I have through sexual health education.
Yeah.
And so I that was kind of the start for me, where I said, well, I think every single woman at that time, I was saying, well, every single woman who's given birth should see a pelvic floor physiotherapist. And then it started to expand a little. My as I became more aware of or educated around things, I said, well, it doesn't just have to be somebody who's been pregnant or had a baby. It could be for lots of different reasons. And the more I started to understand and become aware of prolapse and recognizing that it can often be asymptomatic, then the best person to help evaluate the pelvic floor and the potential development of prolapse is a pelvic floor physio. And so that's where my messaging changed to say, really, just like we have a PAP, or just like we go to the dentist, or just like all this other preventive health stuff that we do, we should be doing the same thing in our pelvic floor. And knowing that we age and we have lots of different influences in life that can interfere with the function of our pelvic floor, knowing that we approach menopause and have hormonal challenges, if we can have somebody on our healthcare team that's helping us manage all of the changes that are happening and influencing the pelvic floor as well, then how awesome would that be? So they compared to, like, a lot of people say, well, I went to see my doctor, I went to my OB or my gynecologist or what have you, and I mean, no disrespect to the medical community. And when drugs and surgery are needed, they are hands down absolutely amazing at what they do. But I believe that pelvic floor physio should really be the first line of defense, not the doctors, not the medical system. And so the physios are regular physios with additional training in the pelvic floor, and they spend usually about an hour for your first time, sometimes an hour and 15 minutes, and they do an external evaluation. They look at posture, they look at alignment, they look at mechanics, they look at movement. Then they do an internal evaluation, which is completely different from what, the other types of internal assessments we've had have been speculum related, usually when we have a PAP.
Right.
So they don't use speculums. They'll use their fingers, gloved fingers, and they assess external genitalia, the internal genitalia, the landscape, the positioning of the organs. They assess the function, of the muscles. They assess the ability of the pelvic floor to contract and relax in a balanced way. They also, if there's been any tearing or if there's any scar tissue, they help mobilize. They're amazing.
So good, so detailed too. And I know for me, I was a typical postured postpartum mom where I would sort of carry my baby on one hip. I would jut my other hip out the side. I had pretty much all the makings for a very awkward pelvic floor because of tightness and different things in different areas. And I was having tons of back pain. And, I never, before I met you guys, never would have related that to my pelvic floor. Like, had no clue whatsoever. I literally was like, oh, I should probably lift heavier weights because clearly I'm weak, was what I was telling myself. And so it's so valuable, this, this knowledge that the pelvic floor physio can offer to us. And I just think it's so valuable to keep revisiting because you're right, with hormonal changes, structural changes. I mean, every year postpartum, probably our body's organs are still shifting, wouldn't you say?
1,000%.
Yes.
And the comment you made about, well, maybe I should just do more because I'm weak.
Yeah.
I hear that all the time. And it's very...
It was making things worse. Yeah, it was making things worse.
Women think, well, if I'm leaking urine, then that must mean I have a weak core. Or they don't necessarily say core, they'll say weak pelvic floor.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily understand the relationship of the pelvic floor within the core.
Mm-mm.
So then they're like, well, I have to go strengthen my pelvic floor. And I just need to exercise more or
do more. You were the one who first told me, and you guys at Belly's Inc. anyways, were the first ones who said, don't do crunches. And I thought, what else are you supposed to do? Right? Like, this was where I was. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, when I see how commonly crunches are used in postpartum physical activity still.
Yeah. And at least myself, Julia and Sam haven't softened quite as much, but, not that I've never been a big supporter of crunches by any means,
right.
But what never felt right to me was that we were removing a movement. And to me, it didn't seem that, well, we should just, everybody who's got a diastasis should never do a flexion movement again. That didn't sit with me.
No.
Right? And so I still don't believe in doing full on crunches by any means, but what my messaging is now, and we in Belly's Inc. as well, is about, it's not about the exercise, it's about the execution, and it's about the person doing that exercise. So there are some people who have no challenges with crunches. And again, they're not my favorite exercise, but if somebody
if done correctly,
if they're doing them and they don't have any symptoms and they love it and it brings joy, then do it.
Right.
But there are people who are doing them thinking it's taking them towards a specific goal of strengthening their core.
Right.
And they might be leaking urine while they do it, or they notice that their tummy never flattens, or their back pain never goes away. So
yes, that was me.
You have to look about what's your goal.
Yeah.
And is the exercise moving you towards that goal? And can you do that exercise in a way that you're symptom free, basically, and that you notice that if you have symptoms, maybe it starts to reduce them. But
yes. Thank you. That's so, so, so valuable. Thank you for sharing that. So, Kim, to finish off our episode today, you've been a wealth of knowledge here and shared so much. I'd love if you could share your 3 key tips that you like to share with your audience, that, people who are just newly introduced to you as the Vagina Coach. What 3 things do you really want to leave our listeners with, some information that is really valuable for them going forward, regardless of where they're at?
So one, we've talked about it ad nauseum, which is pelvic physiotherapist every year.
Yes. And someone can find one in Canada right off of your site at Pelvian Wellness, right? We'll link that up.
Yeah. So vaginacoach.com is easier to say and remember.
Perfect.
So they can
there you go.
And there's a Find a Physio tab.
Awesome.
That's hands down number one. The other would be, I talk a lot about posture and awareness and movement, and the way we hold ourselves throughout the day can often be a big contributor to some of the challenges that we have with our pelvic floor. So sit less, move more, but also move with awareness. I've got some free videos on my site, and one of them is a posture one, so people can go and watch that and understand a little bit more about what I do.
Brilliant.
Talking about. And then the other one is your pelvic floor deserves some attention each and every day. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do 300 kegels every single day, but maybe it does. Maybe you should do some, or maybe you want to do some, or maybe you spend some time blossoming your vulva instead, and really incorporating your pelvic floor, being aware of it and incorporating it into movement throughout the day. So really my Kegel Mojo program is all about that principle that it doesn't just have to be sitting at a red light and squeezing your vagina. It really should be a lot more than that. But when you're lifting groceries out of the car, when you're standing in line at the coffee shop, when you're watching your kids play sports, all these times where we have an opportunity to give our pelvic floor some love, we need to take those opportunities more often.
Love that. So brilliant. So brilliant. We'll be looking for the video on flowering the vulva. Do you have that one up on your YouTube or what?
I do. I have it on Instagram, or I don't know if I have the blossom one. On YouTube and on Instagram, you'll find the blossoming. I've got a vulva puppet that I call my Muppet.
Oh my God, I love it. I love your posts. Honestly, anyone who is not following you at Vagina Coach yet, it's classic. And like the pants and different things that you wear where the muscles can be seen through. And like, it's just, you have super, super cool stuff and really great visuals, because so much of what you talk about is internal, right? So we don't know what that looks like, and we don't know what that even feels like a lot of the time. So I love that you make it really, really simple to start to imagine and create that mind-body connection. So thank you for making things easier on us.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, it is internal. We can't go and flex our pelvic floor muscles in the mirror at the gym. So we have to.
No, yeah, we got to get creative. Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been so valuable, I know, for me, and I'm absolutely, for sure, on behalf of my listeners, thanking you for all your wisdom. Anything else you want to leave us with today here before we leave, Kim?
What do I want to leave you with? Go do some vulva blossoming. So lie down you can lie down, you can sit, you can stand, and I want you to take a breath in and send your breath, that expansive breath, to your pelvic floor, and feel space between your sit bones, and imagine the lips, the two lips. I always say two lips are like flowers. Imagine your two lips blossoming open. And give it some space.
Yes, we will all be doing that today. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us. We so value your very important information, and thank you for your time, Kim.
Thanks so much, Jen.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
And that was Kim Vopni. How awesome is she? She is such a wealth of knowledge. She has been around for so long. She's been talking about the pelvic floor and the deep inner core longer than anyone in the industry. And you can find her at all those links I talked about in the show notes. And you will find her multitude of important tips, tools, and information in her books. Prepare to Push is an amazing one, and we will link to those books also in the show notes. Thanks for being here, Fit Mama. I'm so grateful to bring you the work in to your workout. Hopefully this has fueled your passion for yourself and your Fit Mama journey even more. Share this episode with a friend. They will thank you. Thanks so much for being here. Have a great day. Namaste.